Alrighty. So, we're going to be covering this video here, and I honestly don't know what it's going to be. I've had it recommended to me, but I actually have not pre-watched it. I haven't spoiled myself on the video's contents, and all I know is the title really caught my eye. Are you morally obligated to vote for Biden? Now, that title kind of sounds like it's coming from a video that's going to be against, like, vote blue no matter who, which means this could either end up being me debunking somebody trying to argue that you shouldn't vote Biden, or it could be me agreeing with somebody who's making arguments about why we should, or it could be me having to kind of, like, you know, sift through someone taking a very middle ground position of like, oh, you should vote Biden if you want to, but like, I guess I can't say you have to vote for Biden, you know, it's not like you're a bad person if you don't, I guess, you know, like, it could be like super middle of the road. I have no clue. This YouTuber, or the YouTube channel that posted this is named Leah Miller, or it could be Leah Miller, but like with a silent J. I actually don't know, but it's spelled Leah Miller. And there should be a link down below if this video ends up being something I want to support. But if I end up debunking it, then probably not. So we're about to find out. Let's see. Is this going to be something I'm going to like, or is it going to be something I'm going to have to criticize? That's the big question that I have.
Is going to kill Joe Biden's chance of re-election in 2024.
What's interesting, you see a lot of people searching a little bit. Some saying, I'm not necessarily for Donald Trump. I might entertain a third party. Again, people not liking their choices.
How worried are you about black voters showing up for President Biden in November?
Well, I'm not worried. I'm very concerned.
Voter apathy is going to be the biggest issue in 2024. People feeling like, I don't care about that rematch. Like, I'm not going out to vote for either one of them.
Trump or Biden?
Neither.
What if you get Biden Trump again?
Probably not vote.
No one is excited about the 2024 election. The vast majority of Americans don't want either of the guys that will likely be running at the top of the Democratic and Republican team.
This is a big part of why, despite it being an election year, if you haven't noticed, the expected, like, spike in viewership on lefty channels that we saw, like, back during the BreadTube era has not occurred. The right, the Trumpies, are more ready for Trump's new presidency than ever, so they are watching that content and boosting it more than ever. However, progressives in America could not give a fuck about politics right now. They're not voting, they're disaffected, they're not supporting content, they're not watching content that's political, they're trying to forget it all and just hope everything works out, which is why we've seen such a very strong spike in the expectation Trump is very likely to win in 2024's election. She's good. She covered Project 2025. Okay, that's good to hear. It seems like we might have a pretty damn good video here. I've really wanted to see more lefties talking about why, like, we gotta vote for Biden. I mean, I feel like we could just have an hour-long segment about why the Supreme Court is a singular reason that should move you to vote Biden. And then we could have many more hours of conversation about other things, but the Supreme Court alone could occupy an hour-long segment of me ranting about how stupid it is not to vote blue no matter who.
Tickets. They're old. They're out of touch. We've been here before, and we didn't want it then either. The one difference is that as one of these guys racks up more and more baggage, his base supports him more rabidly than ever before, while the other one has had 4 extra years of baggage that has mainly lost him support, especially in key demographics. And the fissures within the Democratic voter base have only...
And, like, Biden's baggage is honestly few and far between compared to Trump's. Biden has been possibly... Like, God, I genuinely fucking... I really do feel like I have to fight against my urge to, like, be against, like, the people that are marching for Palestine when they carry shit like this. I genuinely do not care if you think Biden is, like, supporting genocide. Trump has outright said that he will do everything in his power to ensure that Netanyahu ends the conflict with Hamas decisively and roots them out. If you don't know what that means Donald Trump plans to be the biggest Israel supporter ever in this conflict. And he has outright stated so. Joe is dragging his feet because, unfortunately, AIPAC and other very powerful Israel interest groups have a lot... They have a lot of American politicians by the balls. In fact, Netanyahu, AIPAC, which is literally like an Israel state interest group, like money group, literally is spending like 100 million or something like that on political campaign ads targeting the Squad during this election because the Squad is so outspoken against Israel. There is a good chance many members of the Squad lose their seats during this election because Israel's committees are about to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on campaign ads attacking them and supporting their competition. How effective they'll be is a whole different question. But remember, the Squad, as much national support as they may have, they have to retain the support of their locality where they're running. And that can be affected. That can be swayed by targeted advertising in the hundreds of millions, which AIPAC is planning to do.
Only gotten deeper.
They plan to, I believe the quote was, surgically strike the Squad.
As the genocide in Gaza has continued with U.S. support, despite widespread condemnation both domestically and internationally. So instead of focusing on what the fuck is going on with Republicans, let's do a little navel-gazing today to talk about what divides the Democratic Party going into the 2024 election and what can be done about it. And later in the video, we'll discuss whether or not you even have a moral obligation.
I'm gonna be honest, like, is there really anything dividing the Democratic Party? The people who aren't voting aren't Democrats. Like, they're deliberately not voting because they aren't Democrats. They identify separately, but they may vote Democrat occasionally or be considered like Democrat voters under other elections, but they are not Democrats. If they were, they'd be voting Democrat. They're progressives or lefties or unaffiliated, quote-unquote, and they tend to align with Biden or with Biden's policies, but they're not voting for him because they think he's just as bad because of an issue that social media has convinced them will somehow is the worst it could ever be right now, which is why you need to really that's what it is. Social media convinces people whatever it is they're focused on is the worst it could ever be right now. You need to watch and be involved right now, paying attention right now, talking about it right now, because there's no way it can get worse. And that same mindset, I know, is what's leading a lot of these people. I have watched them try to debate non-Bernie or Buster. I called these people Bernie or Busters back then, but now they're just retards. I've seen non-voters argue with progressives online, saying, explain to me in one way why I should support one genocide over the other. And they were like, because in one genocide, the one under Biden, less people die. And they're like, you're asking me to vote for less death, but still death? You realize how evil you sound, right? Asking that I participate in this system? That is literally the arguments these people use, claiming that you sound evil for telling them that they need to use their vote to prevent a greater genocide from happening, where more children die and more domestic human rights abuses continue.
Obligation to vote at all. This is why Democrats don't want Biden, but will vote for him anyway. Roll the intro.
Will they, though? We'll find out. If I had to bet right now, I'd put $100
Thank you to my partner on today's video,
Trump
PDS
winning.
Debt. Credit card debt sucks. I have been buried under more credit card debt.
We're gonna skip the sponsor. We're gonna skip the sponsor.
A poll taken in early 2023 found that 73% of respondents didn't think Biden should run for re-election, including 52% of Democrats. Their top complaint? He's too old. He'll be 82 at election time this November and 86 by the end of his tenure. Reminder that the average life expectancy for white men in America is 73. And Biden is the oldest president we've ever had. Only a quarter of Americans believe he has the stamina and sharpness to serve his position as president effectively. Biden's approval rating hovers around 39%. And a poll from just this past December found that more Republicans would be
Yep, despite the fact that he is, like, literally record economic growth under Biden. It's actually crazy. Inflation rates have dropped insanely. Like, Biden domestically has been nothing but an amazing president, but it doesn't matter. People are mad that he's old, and then a bunch of people are mad because just like literally every American president ever and that will ever exist, he supports Israel. They're upset that we don't live in a Fantasyland America, and they refuse to vote unless their like perfect Fantasyland imaginary candidate exists. Mind you, it doesn't matter whether or not that person can actually win. It's just that they have to feel good voting for them. So the reality of this is, you don't vote. You know what? I actually like that one quote from Starship Troopers where he says, voting is violence. Voting is instilling power. Think about it that way. When you are voting, you are using the minuscule amount of power you have over our government to actually change something. Now, if you're a Helldivers player, you know that even a small, tiny fraction of a percentage means a lot in the grand scheme of things. And that you've got to do your part. I know, I'm memeing a little bit here, but I actually think this is a solid argument, you know? Like, even if you're voting for a lesser evil, I know it sucks that you are voting for an evil in the first place, but recognize that you are actually having an impact on making the world slightly better by preventing a worse outcome. And if you don't think Trump as president isn't a worse outcome, please come on my stream because you're so politically inept. I will farm the fuck out of you for content. Please come on my stream and debate me. God, I want to farm you. I would love to farm you for content because I could just run circles around you. Please debate me about this if you disagree. Anyway, let's resume.
Satisfied with having Trump as their nominee than Democrats would be with Biden as their nominee. That same poll found that still nearly half of Democrats are either dissatisfied with Biden as the nominee or don't care at all. 1 in 5 respondents said they would be neither satisfied nor dissatisfied. This is telling. That means 20% of voters who are engaged enough to bother to respond to a political poll still feel incredibly apathetic about the prospect of Joe Biden on their ticket. And listen, this makes sense. The optics aren't great. His speeches are hardly rousing or inspiring so much as hard to follow. It feels like waiting for your grandpa to finish his story so you can start Christmas dinner. The good work he has accomplished, including passing massive infrastructure and historic climate change bills, despite...
You know what really sucks? Ever since, I guess Reagan started it, but I think Trump really kind of, like, made it, like, even lefties believe this. Since when does the president have to be entertaining? Like, oh my God, the average American voter is so fucking stupid. Since when is the president not being entertaining to listen to a substantial factor in your decision as to whether or not you'll vote for them? Oh my God. Could you imagine if we could, like, just beam info into the brains of the average American voter?
A Congress more divided and contentious than it's ever been, isn't well publicized and is overshadowed both by the optics of his presidency and the actions he's taken domestically related to immigration and military.
For the record, by the way, just for a little bit of like a more broad planetary understanding of how fucked we are if Trump wins, climatologists have agreed that if we do not go carbon negative this year, and like substantially carbon negative, as in removing carbon from the atmosphere, like, there's just no way to stop the polar ice caps will melt, sea levels will rise, climates will change. There is no reversing it if we do not go carbon negative. It's big that Biden has opened up more permits than any other president ever for green energy. It's pretty big. He shut down foreign purchases of oil, replacing it primarily with green energy deals and domestic oil drilling. And as much as it sucks that it's oil drilling, at least it's domestic, creating American jobs and you know, American like export and inter-country trade rather than sending more money out of the country. Like, Biden's doing everything that both sides should be like in favor of. The problem is the conservatives control what Republican voters know, because Republicans only listen to conservative media, so their intake of info is completely filtered. And then, of course, for lefties, I think a lot of progressives online are genuinely politically illiterate. Just politically illiterate through and through. And I'm not the most politically informed person ever, but I've gotten to the point now where a lot of my time is spent reading news articles from multiple sources about the same story to catch up on these big stories, learning about the way our government functions, learning about the way our democracy is flawed and ways that it can be harmed by the Republicans' plans. Like, I've gotten to the point where I feel as though anyone on the left who doesn't recognize the danger posed by not voting for Biden is just lacking critical information at this. Like it's just an easy layup. If you are progressive and you care about abortion rights, trans rights, gay rights, gay marriage especially, because that's the next on the chopping block, fucking contraceptive rights to non-married sex. Do they not remember the 4 years under Trump? Do they not remember that because of 4 years under Trump, we now have an endemic, seasonal, surprisingly high kill rate disease virus called COVID that is never going away? Do these people forget that the reason COVID's never going away and it's always going to be here and it's always going to be a seasonal sickness people are getting and dying from is because Trump ensured that in the critical time in which we had to respond to COVID properly, we did all the opposite worse things so he could gain political points back when they were saying COVID wasn't real? Back then it was the not real virus, and then it was the China virus, and then yada, so on, so on. Remember, it was back when they claimed COVID wasn't real. You guys remember that? How many months COVID wasn't real? And then how many months COVID wouldn't be a thing anymore by March? How many months COVID wouldn't be a thing anymore by 2021? How many months COVID wasn't a big deal? How many months COVID's a big deal, but we can get back to work now? How many, it's evolved and evolved and evolved. And how many of you have totally not even thought about the fact that conservatives for months argued COVID isn't even real as it ravaged America? How many of you haven't thought about that fact for years? Months even. That's what Republicans are so good at. Making you forget the fact that we're standing on a pile of bodies created by their decisions. It's so much shit. You're so preoccupied on the newest thing. You forget how truly awful they are.
Aggressions abroad, actions that many in his base have deemed unforgivable. However, while it is the case that most of the country feels incredibly lackluster about the upcoming election, the largest animating motive behind Democratic poll respondents is not to have a candidate who necessarily represents their views, but instead to have one that can win the general election. This is also telling. Presidential elections, arguably more than other elections, are more about beating the other guy than about actual issues and political platforms. Yep. And the one thing that apparently a majority of Democrats can agree on is that there is only one guy who has proven he can beat Trump, presuming Trump will be the Republican nominee, and that's Joe Biden. Whether he can do it again is another story, though. An NBC News poll from November showed that Biden was in lockstep with Trump for support from voters aged 18 to 34, a considerable drop from the 2020 election when Biden had a huge margin over Trump in that same age demographic. Other polling finds that only 17% of Arab Americans
young white men aged 18 to 24 are drifting vastly conservative.
Support Biden, a dramatic fall from the 2020 election when Biden had the support of the vast majority of Arab Americans. This is consequential in important swing states like Michigan, where Arab Americans make up 5% of the vote, and Biden won by 2.8 percentage points in 2020.
Yeah, and of course, Trump represents the side of the Republican Party that's currently pushing the culture war talking point, eradicate transgenderism. You guys know that's what Libs of TikTok's been tweeting, right? Like the last 5 tweets or whatever that Libs of TikTok has tweeted are pictures of trans kids with the words eradicate transgenderism stamped on top of them. Just picture of a trans kid, eradicate transgenderism stamped on top. Just posted on Twitter. Fucking wild. Yeah, no, those are the people that these guys think we just shouldn't vote against.
And these numbers were likely vastly different prior to October 2023. Many Democrats share similar feelings about hot-button issues like abortion, trans rights, immigration reform, and access to affordable healthcare. Of course, many centrist Democrats feel that progressives are too extreme, trying to move too fast, or don't actually represent their interests, but Democrats usually can typically agree on at least general stances on major issues. Then the October 7th attack by Hamas happened, and Israel began its all-out war on Gaza.
That's one of the big things that the Democrats have on their side. Is that some of the biggest wedge issues in America, besides guns, the Democrats have the popular position on. The problem is the Democrats aren't very good at marketing themselves on those positions in a variety of ways. When the Democrats talk about a seriously bad thing when the Democrats talk about a seriously bad thing the Republicans want to do, they do it in a very what's the word for it? not virtue signally, but like it comes off as offended, like, oh my God, we're so worried, we're so scared. And that works on a lot of people, but it's not effective on a lot of others. Like, have you noticed that for a lot of conservatives, something you'll notice is the way they arrive at their thought process is usually they get into politics, and it's oftentimes through conservative content, because that's the forefront. And after learning a couple things about politics, so they think, through those videos, they hit the stage of Dunning-Kruger. And they develop this cognitive dissonance where they've decided what they believe. They've decided it's true. And from there on out, they will only seek out information that acts as a support, an argument that backs up what they believe. They don't look for information on the topic. They look for information that backs up their beliefs. There is no consideration of info that does not agree with their worldview. They don't consider it. They will find excuses to hand wave it. You've probably seen this a million times. There's many ways they do it. But it will always be, any research they do will always just be finding arguments and talking points to back up what they believe. And for the Republicans, this is kind of, you can never really reach those people, right? They have a completely controlled intake of info. While on the left, there's this lack of broad appeal outside of that, where it's like you have to be scared for your life, constantly caring about helping other people. And as much as that is a good thing and that attracts good people, sadly, a lot of people are selfish pieces of shit, and conservatism attracts them. And it's why that, like, edgy, like, on the attack, making fun of conservatives for being stupid, for being moronic, for being hypocritical, not really, like, supporting the left, but attacking the right type comedians and public figures blew up so much with, like, the counterculture young people that started to move into progressivism. Because, I'm sorry, but the way the left generally does its messaging isn't that overwhelmingly popular with a lot of people. But, you know, it's just, it's not very effective. It's not very effective rhetoric on the Democrats' part. Like, the Republicans are able to appeal to a much wider group of people outside of, like, you know, your identity. Like, they appeal to gamers, to movie people, to, like, people who are into guns, to people who are into travel, fitness. Like, look for a niche on YouTube. It's hard to find one that hasn't been dominated by conservatives who in some way, shape, or form have snuck their way in. Hell, even the creepypasta, like, mystery YouTube stuff has been is dominated by Wendigoon, who's like a Christian youth pastor who's gone on record saying he is trying to use his content to, like, get more people into Christianity. But the majority of his content's like creepy stories and mysteries and conspiracies. That's just the intro. It's hard to find a community online now that isn't in some way dominated by the right. And that's what they excel at. And unfortunately, the left just doesn't seek out, like, info on how good of a job the Democratic president is doing. From their view, they're just hearing a lot of complaining. And for a lot of it, it's a bit of like a bandwagon, you know? A lot of conservatives, like I said, they don't seek info to enlighten themselves. They seek info to support their arguments, to convince other people to believe what they do. Because if enough people believe what they do and agree with them, they don't feel the need to justify their ideas. You've noticed that, right? How at a certain point, once these big conservatives are big enough, or these conservative figures are big enough, their gotchas against smaller YouTubers that call them out, or pretty much anybody, is, well, look who's got 1 million subscribers and who doesn't. Even their fans just point to, look how much more numbers-wise successful conservative pundits are than lefties. That alone is the only argument they need once the goalpost has moved enough. Because, in a way, it's a bandwagon. And yeah, when a lot of people seem to agree, when the popularity contest, when the river seems to move a certain way, it's hard to go against the flow.
murdering tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians with impunity while they tried to flee for their lives, destroying learning institutions, mosques, hospitals, and cutting off access to basic necessities like food and water. The world has watched in horror as Israel has committed war crimes against innocent...
Yeah, I think Meat Canyon probably might be a chud. In his video about Andrew Tate, he wrote like a whole comment addendum in the bottom about how he doesn't actually dislike Andrew Tate. It's like you made a whole like video animation based on the fact that he is currently being tried for pedophilia, trafficking of minors, women, like all that shit, and he is him on top of all that. And you wrote like a whole effort post in the comments that almost seems like it's meant to dissuade the Andrew Tate fans from unsubscribing and feeling offended. Like, never before has Papa Meat been like, oh, I'm so sorry that you were offended by my video. I didn't mean to, like, upset anybody. But he posted a comment like that in the replies of his Andrew Tate video. And then on top of that, yeah, Papa Meat likes to hang out with a lot of big right-wing YouTubers. Like, obviously, Brendan Herrera is one of them. We saw Papa Meat was on that podcast where he was making jokes about veterans killing themselves. Brendan Herrera was. That was Papa Meat there on the podcast with him. So, yeah. I think Meat Canyon probably is a bit shuddy, but you know, what do you? I mean, look at the guy. Are you surprised?
Trapped civilians for the last 124 days.
Though to be fair,
many countries have...
to be fair, he did have an editor. One of his editors that he'd hired, Miss Breezy, like she's trans. He had a trans editor, and while she did allege against him that like he did some like bad like thing with firing her, he responded. And the response was so good that Miss Breezy deleted her channel. Which really sucks because I really liked her old videos, like the Newbies series. They're all gone now. You have to find re-uploads. She literally just axed her channel off the internet after Papa Meat responded. But she worked for him for a long time as an editor. And, you know, she's trans. So I don't think Papa Meat's so transphobic he wouldn't hire a trans person. That feels so weird. Yeah, but I mean, like, at the same time... She's a big YouTuber, like a big YouTuber, like over 1 million subs, I think, who just like called him out. He responded, and then his response was so well received and so good that she deleted her whole channel. So it's hard to say who's on the right side of things, but the person who deleted their channel, even with my biases, I'm leaning on probably wasn't in the right.
Come forward to condemn the violence and push back against the Israeli government. Opinion polls show that most Americans are in support of a ceasefire and an end to Israel's war in Gaza. A Reuters poll found that 68% of respondents believed Israel should call a ceasefire and negotiate an end to the war, with 77% of Democrats agreeing with that sentiment. And yet, if you looked at our representatives in Washington, you'd think they were living in an alternate reality. Despite gently suggesting a ceasefire and asking Israel nicely that it maybe try not to kill so many innocent civilians, Biden has largely stood behind the far-right Israeli government, completely in opposition to the opinion of the vast majority of Democratic voters. But it's not just Biden. In December, the House passed a...
I hope she mentions AIPAC. There are no Democratic challengers. What if Biden drops out? What can Biden do? Do you have more moral obligation to vote? Why is no one mentioning AIPAC? Why are so many lefties ignoring the fact that AIPAC is literally dropping like $250 million on targeted ads in the squad's districts to like destroy their political careers because they dared to speak out against Israel? Like, there's this like complete ignoring of the fact that Israel has any American politician by the balls and can destroy their political career if they don't toe the line.
A Republican resolution that equates anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. 95 Democrats voted for the resolution. Another 92 Democrats voted present, meaning they neither supported nor opposed the resolution. Only 13 Democrats voted against this resolution. Reminder that roughly 7...
I like how we're not even acknowledging the fact that 216 out of 217 Republicans voted yes. I'm sorry, but when half the party votes yes, when less than half the party votes yes, a few vote like no, and most vote I'm not even taking part in this, and a few, oh yeah, sorry, look at this. Look at this. You can see it mathematically how much worse the Republicans are than the Democrats. Look at this. This is a literal mathematical showcase of how much worse the Republicans are than the Democrats. Oh yes, this bill's bad? This bill is really bad? Okay, so is it the Democrats' fault that this many of them voted? Or is the Republicans bad that this many of them voted yes? How the fuck can you see this and still think the Democrats are just as bad?
resolution. Only 13 Democrats voted against this resolution. A reminder that roughly 70% of the polled population thinks there should be a ceasefire and is opposed to the current actions of the Israeli government. When ceasefire protesters congregated outside Capitol Hill, Democratic Senator John Fetterman waved an Israeli flag at the protesters, earning him praise in an article on Breitbart News. In November, a large pro-Israel protest was attended by top congressional Democrats, including Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who led...
I guarantee you a lot of this is being done because these guys know their political careers are over if AIPAC targets them. Like, I'm not even... Can I show you? Can I show... I'm not making this up. AIPAC targets the squad. The squad is about to fight for its political life. The war in Gaza has set the stage for a huge primary battle in 2024. One of the biggest, bitterest, and most expensive political battles of the 2024 election cycle has emerged. The American Israel Public Affairs Committee, or AIPAC, one of the most powerful, best-funded influence operations in Washington, is planning to go all out to knock out the famed squad. The small group of highly visible and popular progressive legislators of color, most of them women, out of office. The most outspoken and unapologetically leftist contingent of the Democratic Party in national office, the Squad, has been vocal in its criticism of Israel's retaliatory assault on Gaza following the October 7th massacre of Israelis by Hamas. Members of the group have prominently pushed a ceasefire resolution in Congress. It now has 18 signatories. Their positions on the issue are hardly radical. A recent data for a progress poll found that 66% of Americans support a ceasefire, as do 80% of Democrats. But AIPAC has trained its attention on these members to make an example of them. To make an example of them. That's right. To tell the other politicians that you're mad at for not doing what will kill their political careers what will happen and kill their political careers. I'm sorry, as much as you would like these politicians not do genocide, their careers are over in politics if they don't support the genocide. Money in politics is possibly the biggest problem in all of Washington. Other countries can just bribe our politicians with blackmail like this into not supporting or supporting things. It sucks, but that is how our political system works. You, the people who are not willing to vote Biden because of this, are the susceptible, politically uneducated people that AIPAC relies on being able to convince with their millions of dollars in ads they're going to buy into not voting Democrat so Trump can win. And so that the opponents of the squad end up winning. They're relying on you. AIPAC, the types of people who won't vote Biden are the types of people AIPAC are going to convince to not support the squad. Politically uninvolved, uneducated, illiterate dumb fucks. Politically illiterate dumb fucks. AIPAC is that one Israel company that would absolutely kill Biden's career if he didn't support them, right? Yes. AIPAC. The most outspoken and politically leftist... Oh, yeah. Their positions on the issue are hardly... Oh, yeah, we already read that. AIPAC wants to, quote, make the statement this cycle that no one is safe from their wrath, that if you speak out, you can be targeted no matter how popular or how many cycles of incumbent you are, said Connor Farrell, president of the progressive fundraising group Left Rising, in a phone call. Quote, it's extremely audacious. There are now 7 indisputable members of the squad, up from the original 4 elected in 2018. Those are AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and Ayanna Pressley. In 2020, the contingent of progressive members of color expanded with the election of Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman. What the fuck? Why did they typo here? Is this my fucking browser lagging out? Why is there, like, one of those emoji errors here? Chat, you know how when you type, like, an emoji on, like, a device that can't handle it, and it just shows, like, a box of the line through? I'm going to refresh the page. No, my ad blocker is not on. It wasn't on before. Okay, it's fine now? Opera, are you okay? Maybe I need to update Opera or something? Did I have, like, a memory leak? Is the stream okay? Weird. I've never had that happen before, where you just, like, scroll through an article or a page, and for some reason text appears as blocks. Like, four different parts of the paragraph were, like, squares with a line through them. Stream's fine? Okay, because I worry that's a memory leak, because usually when that kind of stuff happens on your browser, it's because something's wrong with your RAM, and that can fuck up a stream fast. Fighting the urge to shout Firefox's praises. I'll update. I'll see if there's like an update to Opera, or see if there's like a memory leak after stream. We're getting hacked. No, I'm not getting hacked, but like that's a weird bug. Anyway, there are now. Oh yeah, we already read this. Strongly activist allied. The squad members are staunch advocates for progressive causes that include Medicare for All, the Green New Deal, police reform, and student debt relief. Critically, all of them reject big money backing, surviving on just grassroots support and small dollar fundraising. They have quickly become some of the most well-known members of Congress. Most are quite adept at using social media and are equivalently, sorry, I can't read, reviled by Republicans and some corporate Democrats for their advocacy. Oh, no, we got another one of those little boxes here, too. The C appears as a box. It's so weird. Is my browser shitting itself? AIPAC has a turbulent history with them and progressives in general. In the 2022 midterms, the Israel lobby became the largest single-issue outside spender in Democratic primaries, pouring in nearly $30 million via the super PAC, the United Democracy Project, and millions more via the Democratic Majority for Israel PAC. It was an astronomical amount of money, mostly directed at knocking progressives out of the primaries, largely in open and redrawn seats. Despite there being fewer vacancies in 2024, that money figure is expected to at least triple. Israel policy was rarely ever mentioned in the ads those super PACs ran against progressives in the 2022 election cycle. Remember, the AIPAC ads aren't going to be like, here's why you should support Israel. They're going to be Israel spending money for the opponents of these politicians to make whatever ads they want, attacking them however they want, whatever wedge issues they want. It's all about making an example of them. So, because like within Washington, this is not meant to be like a big known thing that the world knows about and making an example of those who are, anti-Israel to America. This is a message to all the politicians in Washington to stay in line. Do not talk shit about Israel. Do not go for a ceasefire. Do not support it. Do not give in to your voter base. We will annihilate your political career if you do. And honestly, so many of these politicians already have such low approval ratings, they cannot afford to get on AIPAC's bad side because that approval rating won't go up. The dumb fucks who let their dropped their approval for Biden because of this will never reapprove of Biden because Biden goes back on this or isn't old. The old part will never change. If AIPAC goes against Biden, his age and the money that will be spent on ads against him from Israel will guarantee another Trump presidency. He is between a rock and a hard place here. I'm curious to see the segment of this video about what Biden can do.
Okay, so them's the breaks. Biden will be the Democratic nominee barring his untimely demise, but most people don't want that, and many are unenthused about voting for him or outright refuse to, and we'll talk about whether you should in a minute. So what could Biden do at this
This is the last segment I stream, so I'm just going to check and see if my browser's fucked after the stream. Don't worry, guys. Hopefully it's not related to my stream crashes. I think it could be memory problems, honestly, with my computer. That kind of, the crashes with my stream kind of sound like a memory leak. And then the problem there with my browser kind of sounds like a memory leak. You hear hoof beats, you think horses, not zebras.
point to win people back and get them excited to show up to vote for him? Well, I'm not sure if there's anything he could do to get people excited at this point, but to get them to show up and vote for him over Trump or over not voting at all, I don't think would be terribly complicated at this point. He needs to call for a ceasefire in Gaza.
My cookies,
it aligns with
maybe.
what the vast majority of his base wants and is not a particularly radical stance, though I'm sure it seems like one from within the chokehold that Israel has on our politicians. According to many poll respondents, he needs to cancel the student debt he promised us too. The thing about that, though, is the Supreme Court blocked his way for the massive sweeping forgiveness we were all looking for. So his administration has spent the last few years finding other ways to slow.
Who appointed those Supreme Court justices, by the way? We got a Republican supermajority Supreme Court. Why exactly? Just curious. Could we, anyone in chat want to raise their hand and maybe give an answer for the class? Why is there a Supreme Court with a Republican supermajority that can block Biden's attempts at student loan forgiveness? Because we had one single term of Trump where he was able to appoint, like, what was it, 3 justices during his term? Lifelong positions, by the way. They either have to step down voluntarily or die to lose that position. So just one term of Trump meant that we have a Republican supermajority until a literal death on the Supreme Court happens, most likely. It's almost always a death. We've got a while. Clarence Thomas will be the first, probably, and he's got a while, I think. So just one term of Trump has done that. There is no way a second term of Trump goes any better. God forbid one of the few Democrats left dies or steps down, and Trump's able to solidify the Republican supermajority for decades ahead. The Republican Supreme Court that Trump made, they're looking at banning contraception. They've already gotten rid of Roe v. Wade. They're looking at banning gay marriage. I believe Clarence Thomas had already talked about that like gay marriage is on the chopping block. They want to get rid of contraception and effectively make like premarital sex illegal. They want to enforce sodomy laws, I'm pretty sure. Like, I don't know what else to say. Like, we cannot allow another term of Trump. Yikes, we really need a plan B for this stuff. There is no plan B. Perry Icefire, chat. There is no plan B. There is no alternative. You can flee the country if you're lucky. There is no alternative. You vote Biden and Biden wins, or we get, at the very least, more, like, at least a decade more of a supermajority Republican Supreme Court. If you are LGBT, you are going to lose rights. If you are a woman, you are going to lose rights. That is already set in stone. That one term of Trump meant that no matter who's president, you are going to lose rights. It's just what's going to happen. There's no changing it. If Trump gets longer, there's no saying how much worse it gets. And there's no plan B. There's no undoing it. There's no flipping the switch. There's no impeaching Trump. There's no convicting Trump. Day one, Trump is completely legally immune. That's part of Project 2025. Trump, as president, will be completely immune from all legal charges. There is no way to turn it back if Trump wins. If Biden doesn't win, Trump wins. And that's what happens. And I'm not making this up. Go to Trump's website. Look up Project 2025. It's his campaign platform.
Slowly canceled debt that go around the Supreme Court's ruling. It's less flashy, less obvious, and doesn't exactly fulfill what he promised us. But the reality is that 3.7 million Americans have received some form of loan canceling.
The sad thing is that Biden's done everything in his power to be the best possible president he can be domestically with these policies. And how many of you just found out about this student loan forgiveness that he did? He worked beneath the authority of the Supreme Court as much as possible. Remember, we have this checks and balances system here. We've got the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. So the judicial branch here has the executive branch by the balls, but the executive branch can still do some stuff, and that's what Biden's done. But with the Supreme Court blocking him, with that check being balanced, he can't do that big headline breaking, everybody's cheering and throwing their hats in the air, all student loan debt is canceled policy that would have made everybody support him. But he did the best he fucking could. And guess what? Most of you probably just found out about this because it's just not talked about. No one cares. If it's not exactly what they wanted, they won't vote for Biden. They won't even talk about it so that people who would celebrate it will hear about it. Even those that would like the job that Biden is doing, that would support Biden if they knew what he was doing, aren't talking about it enough or deliberately suppressing it enough to make sure you don't know how good of a job he's doing. I've been doing the best I can to talk about stuff like this that most of the left is ignoring because they don't want to look like they're supporting Biden in a time where hating Biden's the sexy thing to do right now. Criticizing Biden for not like doing a ceasefire with Israel magically is the hot, sexy thing to do right now as a lefty content creator. Nobody wants to be out here talking about how these like dry policies that are actually helping people are good and are things Biden is doing and are reasons you should vote for him. No one's going to watch this video probably when it goes out. I mean, when this video goes out and you do watch it, look at its performance compared to previous videos. There is very, very little interest, even within this community, for content about why you should vote for Biden and what a good job Biden is doing. Lefties and progressives just aren't down. It feels over reels. It's genuinely feels over reels. Truly, Biden derangement syndrome.
Totaling about $136 billion in aid. Entire education experts have said that Biden has done more to implement student loan forgiveness than any previous president. It's not the $400 billion he promised us, but his campaign could be doing more to promote the work they're doing to fulfill those promises in the face of political and legal opposition. His campaign could be doing more, period. A recent TikTok from Imani, aka Crutches and Spice, pointed out that if you go to the Biden campaign website, it asks for a lot of donations and then presents zero information about the issues. Nothing. But also, so many job postings, like they have barely gotten their shit off the ground. The White House website does lay out the issues, but the fact that he's hardly put any effort behind campaigning is indicative of how little.
Well, the Democrats also have far less money than the Republicans do. Like, don't get me wrong, the Democrats have money, but like, the Republicans are the representatives of corporate interest in America. There's not a lot of corporate interest in Democrats winning. The Democrats, I mean, famously, like, government officials aren't really great at making websites. Donald Trump's a businessman. Biden's a politician. It's an uphill battle in every way, shape, and form.
He's doing to communicate the good he is doing. At least not in a way that will actually reach.
I have good news, actually. The GOP are almost bankrupt. It happens all the time. It's nothing new.
People. No one's going to go to whitehouse.gov and say, I wonder what Biden's doing for me. Let me click around for the next half hour to decipher. But I guess maybe that's just because, according to his campaign website, he's still looking for most of his communications and social media teams. And when I looked at the job post for Director of Social Communications, not only...
That's good, because that means that he's actively looking to expand those teams, which is in dire need.
Not only are they looking for someone with 10 plus years of experience, but that person also needs a point of view of how we campaign in the hyper-fragmented, vertical video-driven social media moment of today. The listing goes on to say, we also need someone who recognizes that social media is not just a Gen Z thing. It's a core way we talk to all of our key audiences. If you think malarkey is a red flag, if your Roman Empire is the fight to protect democracy, or you realize that the sentence is itself proof that we need help here, we want to talk to you. Okay.
Oh, yeah, like, someone with 10 plus years of experience who can, like, speak with the Zoomers, that's not going to work. Like, the Biden campaign legit needs to be hiring, like, college students for this job. Like, college students need to be doing this. Like, those will be, like, the most tapped into, like the progressive, like, Zoomer memes and stuff, and able to, like, actually, like, oh, God, man. I see where she's coming from here. It's not an argument against voting for Biden, but it's definitely an argument for how his campaign could do better in some ways.
Okay, self-aware, I guess, but then it goes on to say, please do not tell us that we need a Taylor Swift strategy. We are tracking. I don't even know what that means. It's like they really want to be cool, but they refuse to hire someone young enough to actually make them cool. Like, pick a lane. Do you want to talk to Gen Xers who still post boomerangs on Instagram? Or do you want to reach Gen Z, who are the ones most bored and or opposed to what you're doing? Because this lane...
That is a damn good point. Because, like, Biden has decent appeal with, like, Gen X, my mom's generation, the most annoying generation. Sorry, Mom, but I actually think I dislike Gen X more than Boomers, personally. But yeah, like, Gen X loves Biden for all, you know, all the criticisms I have. They're pretty big. They're not really the ones that need to be marketed to. Like, Gen X is pretty... like, most Gen X, particularly women, are pretty on board with the Democrats. The problem is Zoomers, like young out-of-college people who are currently not in favor of Biden because he's, like, a billion years old, and not in favor of Biden because he's doing the bad thing that all of their friends and social media says that they shouldn't support him for. You got to remember, a lot of progressives are just as dumb as most conservatives. Just because they have good positions doesn't mean they arrived at them properly. A lot of these young people are in college and they've just kind of fallen into a new bubble, into a new sphere, and they've adapted correct positions on most things, but they haven't reached those positions through thought, but they've gotten on a bandwagon much like conservatives do online. And so they aren't good at, like, defending their positions. They're not good at, like, reasoning things out from there. They just have a set of values they've been taught to believe from their new space, and that's what they stick to. So, like, they believe in, like, LGBT rights and all these good things, but they don't actually have the political know-how or literacy or knowledge to understand what you need to do in the realm of politics to achieve anything you actually believe in. which is why they think that politics is a representation of your moral purity rather than a implementation of the very small amount of power you have over our government and our officials.
Language will appeal to neither of them. Politics is PR, and Biden is doing a trash job at it. But that in itself is the nature of politics, especially in a two-party system that's more divided than ever. If Biden tries to appeal to those calling for a ceasefire, which are the majority of his base, he risks losing support from the wealthiest in his base, who tend to have a larger voice because money buys political clout in this country. Everything he does is too leftist for some people and not leftist enough for others. So he has to toe the line and make no one happy. The same cannot be said for Trump, who has managed to ride the populism wave straight to fascist town, on top of the fact that, as one article described it, Trump's narcissism has a childlike quality that does not register as old, and his lack of concern with making any sense or following a train of logic frees him from having to pause or stumble over his words.
So he's completely immune from any criticism of being old despite being only a few years younger than Biden. He does not get the old criticism. He has stamina. I have stamina. So he's completely immune from that like thing that's dragging Biden down, his age, despite being a few years younger than Biden.
He doesn't have to toe the line because he crossed it long ago and brought enough of his party along with him that he doesn't have to give a shit about appealing to anyone else. So, can Biden win back enough people to get the turnout necessary for him to be elected? The jury's still out, but he's got a lot of work to do. And then we finally arrive at the final question. No matter what Biden does in the next 10 months, there are many people who he's lost permanently, lately mostly because of his stance on Israel, but also because of apathy, disinterest, and disillusionment with politics generally. So let's talk about voting and whether you have an obligation or a moral duty to vote at all. First, the reasons why people on the left may not vote for Biden include political apathy, the people who say, I'm not really interested in politics, it's too inconvenient, my vote doesn't count, so why bother? Moral opposition, the people who say what he's done supporting Israel at the border, etc. is unforgivable, and I refuse to cast my vote to elect someone who has supported those policies. I would rather vote for no one, or a third-party candidate. And political protest, the people who say the only thing politicians care about is getting reelected, so voicing opposition isn't enough. We have to refuse to vote in people who we do not agree with, or who
This logic is hilarious to me. Yes, I'm going to not vote for you so that you will follow the policies I want when you're not elected and you're not in power anymore. And then if it's not that, it's I'm going to threaten not to vote for you, but I don't actually mean it. Like, what is the point then? It makes no fucking sense. There is no good reason for a progressive in this country to not vote Biden. You know, I really do think we need to start adopting the sort of the virtue signaling that conservative. So, okay. Back when Bernie lost the primaries, there was a big movement within the left to not vote for Joe Biden, to not vote for whoever, and well, at the time, we didn't know it was going to be Biden, but we were pretty sure it would be. Whoever the nominee would be, I was saying vote blue no matter who. Doesn't matter if it's Bernie or not. And the argument was always, you're so awful for supporting all these evil things Biden has done. Now, mind you, none of the arguments those people made back then about why Biden would be a bad president ever came true. They tried to use arguments like, look at what he said back in the 60s. Look how racist he is. He's going to do all this bad racist stuff. Never happened. Look how much of a conservative he's basically a Republican. He's not going to do anything that's going to change anything at all. And then look, we've got like record economic growth, record like attempts to like implement progressive policy like student loan forgiveness, expansions to medical care for people. Fuck it, there's like countless things I can't even think of. Expansions of jobs to far more Americans, unemployment dropping. It's like I don't know what to say other than like you're delusional if you don't think you need to vote for Biden. Thankfully, that turned out to not matter in 20s, though turnout differentials induced by COVID nearly did cause Trump to win again. Yeah. Now, what I do think is important to remember is that Republicans, their voter turnout's going to be very high. There is no room for political apathy within the left right now. There's no room for that. You can't do that. The Republicans are not apathetic. They are making the final sprint. They see this as a race that is neck and neck, and you are 2 body lengths away from the finish line. Imagine swimming. And all they need to do is put in all their effort for this last few feet, and they win. And right now, for some reason, the Democrat swimmer is deciding now is the time to hit my, like, slow, like mediated, like chill down, cool down speed, right as like it's time to sprint to the finish line. That is what's happening right now with Democrat voters. I'm going to send this clip when you make it to all my friends complaining about Biden. Hell yeah.
Who do not listen to us. Only through this threat will we actually have political sway. And for some people, it's a little of all three. To be honest, I've generally been of the opinion that people have the obligation to vote, because to not vote for Biden means a vote for Trump. And my opinion on that has changed or gotten a little bit more complicated recently. So let me tell you why. First, do people have a moral obligation to vote? Is there a rational argument behind not voting
if they reasonably
Listen,
can.
I'm no philosopher, but I did find an extensive and interesting article.
There's no rational argument around not voting at all. Do not try to give it any grounds.
From the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on the ethics and rationality of voting, linked in the research document posted in our Patreon community. I'll give you some cliff notes. Basically, the rationality and moral imperative to vote depends on your goal in voting in the first place. If your goal in voting is to affect the outcome of the presidential election with your vote, you probably won't vote, because that's not a rational choice. The likelihood of your vote affecting the outcome is nearly zero, unless you live in a state where the outcomes in the past have been incredibly close. Then it may still be rational.
That is... I hate this logic. I think Sean had argued this logic with me once when we were friends. Like, she said, I'm not going to vote for Biden because I live in New York, which is hard blue, so my vote won't matter. And it's like, okay, sure, that might be the case depending on where you live, but, like, you don't know that. You can't 100% know the results of the election before the votes come out. You can't bank on the idea that voter turnout will be so high in your solid blue state that the Republicans in the rural areas won't be able to out-voter turnout you and actually swing things or make it purple. Those delegates can split. If a state doesn't go hard blue enough, delegates can split. And that can be a big problem. I mean, that's not even getting into the fact that delegates can just decide not to go with what the state voted for. That's like literally a thing they can do. Like a state's delegates can just say, you know what? The state voted pretty much entirely for Biden, but I'm going to go to Trump. I'm casting my vote for Trump. Yeah, one of the New York delegates goes to Trump. That's literally a thing that can happen with the Electoral College. It is genuinely that fucked. A guy who is just in a position could just say, no, I don't wanna. It's totally legal. And then just cast his delegate vote for the other guy that the state didn't vote for. But the system is such that those delegates are supposed to cast their votes for what their state voted for. It's very, very weird, huh? How fucked our system is. Very weird.
Rational to vote based solely on the goal of affecting the outcome.
Yeah, you don't count on voter turnout being high enough in your blue state that you don't have to vote. You vote anyway. You vote just to make sure you add that extra, like, blue vote on top of the total popular vote count. Because you know what? Say what you want about Trump, like, winning the election in 2016. I still think it's a pretty solid thing to be able to point to that he lost the popular vote. Trump won by technicality. He did not get more votes than Hillary. Hillary got more votes than Trump. But Trump won by technicality because the way the delegate divvying works with the Electoral College. So you need to consider the fact that even with a majority of people in America voting for one candidate, the other guy can still win. Your vote matters. Not to mention, holy shit, who has a link to that one Twitter post of that recent like local election that went to the Republican by 1 or 2 votes? It was like less than 5 votes the Republican won by in that local election. It was like a Senate seat, not a Senate seat, like a House seat or something. Republican won by 2 votes. Because remember, when you go out to vote for the president, you're not just going out and voting for the president. This is another thing that's super dumb. When you go and you vote on election day, it's not just the president. There's a ton of other positions you're voting for. And a lot of that is local. So if you're like not going to the polls or you're not doing mail-in voting at all, even in your blue state, you're also shrugging the responsibility of local electorate. You're voting on, they're called midterms. They happen every 2 years, including during the main election. And by the way, Zan, don't forget about Dems even in rural areas too. Yeah, if you're in a rural area, you've got to come out and vote. Hey, Soak Done Left. I don't agree on the deep blue state point. In uncompetitive elections, you should cast a protest vote for that election only, not all ballot options. If enough people do so and it becomes competitive, then you just revert and should cast a lesser evil vote. Are we talking about a primary or a general? We're talking about the general election here, by the way. We're not talking about the primaries. This video is about the general election.
But if your goal in voting is to be an agent who has participated in causing a specific outcome, part of the larger cause as opposed to being the individual cause, then perhaps voting makes more sense for you. You feel a part of something. It's not necessarily about whether your individual vote changed anything tangible.
Sorry.
Voting can also be seen as an expressive activity, a way to show membership to a group or to demonstrate commitment to their political team. As the Stanford Encyclopedia puts it, sports fans who paint their faces in team colors do not generally believe that they as individuals will change the outcome of the game, but instead wish to demonstrate their commitment to their team. For some, that is what voting means to them. They vote and develop ideologies according to Stanford in order to signal to themselves and others that they are certain.
I have no love in my heart for the Democrats as an institution. I cringe at them often, and I begrudgingly support them with all my full chest because the Republicans are just that much worse. The Republicans are just so fucking bad that as much as I do not like the Democrats and the corporatization, the institution, the aesthetics, the rhetoric, the people for the most part, all that shit. As much as I'm not a big fan, the fucking fence sitting, as much as I'm not a big fan of that shit, the Republicans are so solely, unanimously dedicated to ruining this country. The Democrats are the only alternative. Now, protest votes, fundamentally, they just aren't a thing. Like, I hear about them, like they're an idea, but as far as, like, ever having been a thing, I haven't seen any evidence of that. I would love to, if it exists, and I feel like you would have it, Soak Done Left, if it exists. But has there been an election where there's evidence that people withheld their votes from the progressive candidate and that forced the local progressives to, like, find someone more radically progressive to represent them, and then that person won because, like, the party or the local party moving to a more, like, radically progressive position helped their vote, like their electoral position, like their actual votes, like that helped them? Because the problem is, most of the policies that Biden is supporting and is doing are good and well supported by most people. The problem is that most Americans don't know about them. Like, we literally just went over the fact that Biden was able to forgive like $137 million in student loans, like under the nose of the Supreme Court, who has blocked his other attempts to forgive all of it. So that was just learned about by many people in my chat when that was brought up in this video. They didn't know about it because while Biden's policies are really popular, the people who they are popular with, most Americans, don't know about them. They don't know about his achievements. They aren't following that. They're only hearing through the grapevine that there is a lot of negativity about Biden, and then probably feel a little iffy because he's so old on top of all that, which has already primed them to believe any negative thing they hear.
Certain kinds of people. For example, suppose Bob wants to express that he is a patriot and a tough guy. He thus endorses hawkish military actions. Or, for example, suppose Lindsay wants to communicate that she is a good person, so she posts on social media that she donated her money. In many ways, this is performative, sure, but it's also human nature, and it often plays a role in how and whether people choose to vote. Okay, so those are some reasons why someone may choose to vote or not vote, but do they have a duty to do so? Well, as we've established, it's incredibly unlikely that an individual vote will affect the outcome of an election. So applause.
It's complicated. That's already not a good start, considering that you can't ask the median American voter to engage with complicated. The clearest example of this kind of voting is in fusion voting systems like New York, where one candidate can be endorsed by multiple parties. See, for example, the Labor and Liberal Party in FDR's election, where they're trying to show how much support they have to make confessions of the Dems. Okay, so fundamentally, I don't believe that this can work so long as first-past-the-post voting exists. When our electoral system exists with a two-party system and first-past-the-post primary voting, there's really no way that people can rest assured that they can vote for what represents their interests and then vote for their backup just in case, so that they have their second choice, lesser of two evils, also selected, but they can still show their support for their guy. Most states have banned fusion, yeah, because, like, they want to preserve this electoral system, as broken as it is. It's what they know. It's what, for Republicans, allows them to maintain power much of the time. Like Trump, he wouldn't have won if it weren't for the Electoral College. So it's like, yeah, it's a really hard thing to argue when we've got the electoral system we have. I would not disagree with the idea of protest voting if we had a different electoral system. If you could rank choice vote, for example, during primaries, or if you could just rank choice vote during the general election. That would be nice, huh? Write in your candidate, select a third-party candidate, but then also select your second choice or your third choice, and have, like, your I am voting against this person choice. Like, you know, whoever ends up being the frontline nominee against this guy, my vote goes to. If that is the way that our electoral system worked, there would absolutely be no tumultuous issues here. And frankly, the reason this is a problem is our leadership, which has to be fixed via leveraging our electoral power through voting to get new leaders in power that are at least somewhat amenable to changing our electoral system so that it can be more representative of what the American people want. The problem is, it's a hard sell, but the best way you're going to achieve that is with a solid majority, a supermajority of Democrats in every single possible seat we can get them into across the board, especially locally. House seats, Senate seats, and of course the presidency. It all matters. Local electoral elections, governors, judges, all these make such big differences. You guys don't even think about it that much, but it really does make a big fucking difference. Even the local elections you're voting on when you go out there to vote for president too. That sheet of paper you're voting on goes way past where you're voting for president. You got to vote for other stuff too. And if you just decide not to vote because you just don't care about this election, you are completely dropping the local election and all the responsibility that comes with it. And that's where your local life, like your life, is going to be impacted the most. Local politics. And you just don't care because fuck Biden.
Plausible
Vote.
argument in favor of a duty to vote has to identify a reason why people should vote, despite the fact that their individual vote doesn't matter. And if you think that people have a civic duty to vote, that begs the question of whether that civic duty is fully complete.
This logic is so flawed. An individual vote doesn't matter, and yet the election is decided by millions and millions of individual votes. The fundamental flaw in logic here is when everybody decides, or enough people decide their individual vote doesn't matter, suddenly that's a statistic. It's no longer a single person, you know, saying they're not going to vote. It's a statistic people are looking over to determine how the election went the way it did. Enough people thinking that way becomes a statistic, and statistics affect elections.
Completed with voting, and even whether voting is the best way to achieve that civic duty. There are many ways to contribute civically that don't involve voting.
They literally call dying becoming a statistic. One person dying is called becoming a statistic. That is how being an individual works. You are part of a statistic, and you need to be part of the statistic you want to win. You want to be the majority.
And that arguably have a greater impact. As Stanford puts it, if a citizen has a duty to be an agent who helps promote other citizens' well-being, it seems this duty could be discharged by volunteering, making art, or working at a productive job that adds to the social surplus. If a citizen has a duty to avoid complicity in injustice, it seems that rather than voting, she could engage in civil disobedience.
Yeah, you can call, email, and write letters to your representatives too. Like, you can literally, like, you don't even have to, like, use your vote as your way of, like, levying your willpower on your representatives. You can call them. Write them letters, email them. They'll respond sometimes. If you write a letter to the White House, they have to respond. They did that with the whole Death Star request thing, remember? Like, let's not pretend like the only way you can let them know what you want, like what their constituents want, is by not voting for them or threatening not to. Because I assure you, that's not the only way. If the White House started getting millions of letters from people demanding this or demanding that, that would have just as big, if not bigger, of an impact. It would definitely hit the headlines.
write letters to newspaper editors, pamphlets, or political theory books, donate money, engage in conscientious abstention, protest, assassinate criminal political leaders, or do any number of other activities. It's unclear why voting is special or required. If a person is voting for the purpose of aiding and helping others, then they would at the very least need to be sufficiently well informed to vote for the better candidate, a condition few voters meet. The Stanford article goes on and on and on, but the long story short is that there isn't a clear answer as to whether there is an obligation, ethical, moral, or otherwise, to vote, especially if that voter is ill-informed or impartial to the outcome. The best argument I could find is that voting is an essential part of a democracy, and so participating by voting is a means to show your support of democracy itself. But there are arguments against all of this. Who am I to sit here and tell a Palestinian American, or anyone for that matter, that voting for Joe Biden is a vote in favor of democracy itself, while he supports an anti-democratic regime?
I hate this. I hate this. What was it last time? What was it last time, guys? Guys. What was it during the Bernie or Bust movement? What was the talking point against voting for Biden back then? Who am I to tell what was the group of people that were like the oppressed group that had the right to not vote Biden, and like they was it trans people supposedly, or like I forget what group back in the 2020 election like was arguing for the Bernie or Bust. Like, what group were you supposedly not able to tell should vote for Biden? I think it's because they were claiming Biden was racist, right? Because of the stuff back in the 60s with the what was it called? The criminal justice bill, or whatever it was called. I forget what the name of the bill was, but like it was unanimously supported, and people claimed that Biden was like the one Democrat that supported it or whatever. Yeah, the crime bill, exactly, yeah. Remember back then? I don't remember. This is a problem. You guys don't remember. Back during 2020, the Bernie or Busters, the anti-Biden voters back then, were arguing, how can you tell black people to vote for Biden when Biden's so racist against black people? And it's like, meanwhile, Biden had the highest approval rating among like older black people in America. Like, practically winning him the election was that demographic. Like the idea that like overwhelmingly black Americans didn't like Biden and thought he was racist was a completely fabricated narrative made up by internet lefties who didn't want to vote for Biden and wanted to make it seem like they were being anti-racist by withholding their vote. It reminds me a lot of that. How can I tell a Palestinian to vote for Biden? How can I tell a black person to vote for Biden after... Yep, same fucking talking point. Same fucking talking point being used to support the same fucking idea.
Regime actively committing genocide. And who am I to say that you need to vote in order to fulfill your civic duty when there are arguably more effective ways to promote democracy or improve the well-being of others?
Well, the best way to promote democracy is to play Helldivers 2 and fight against the automatons in Malevelon Creek. Democracy never sleeps, and neither do I. However, no. The best way to affect democracy is to actually use democracy. In case you forgot, democracy is when people vote for representatives that represent their ideas and then have the power to put those ideas into law. That is what democracy is. Not participating in democracy is not protecting it, especially when the other party's platform, Trump's platform, is annihilating our democracy.
I will say I am skeptical of the argument that threatening not to vote will sway public policy, except for when wealthy people who have bought the ear of our politicians do it. Until we get money out of our politics, nothing will ever have more sway than cold hard cash. For my part, I will likely still vote for Biden this November. Not proudly or because I support him, but because I'm terrified of the alternative. I get that they're both generally bad, but have you seen my video on Project 2025?
That's what I'm doing.
At least in the Democratic Party generally, there are still some people who don't want to completely upend our democracy. Maybe that's not a good enough reason for many people to vote for Biden, but I know it is reason enough for a lot of people. But I'm not going to...
That's the problem, though. You can't have any forgiveness in your heart for people that are so privileged that to them there's no difference between a Biden and a Trump presidency. You have a moral obligation to the people who are not privileged enough for it to not matter who's president, to vote for the person who will hurt those unprivileged people the least, or in Biden's case, help them the most. Biden's actually doing a good job domestically. Let's not forget that Biden's actually policy-wise doing a good job. We have a moral obligation. I don't know what identity this YouTuber has gender-wise, or because I don't assume, or like whatever. But like, presumably they're white and they're an affluent YouTuber. So in that case, from my perspective, do you not have a moral obligation to tell people to vote for Biden when Trump's policy is to crack down on trans identities, to destroy our democracy, to destroy people's rights to access to contraception, and so much more, to shut down the border? Immigrants. Are you an immigrant? What right do you have to tell immigrant voters, or to say in front of a bunch of immigrants that could be watching your videos, that people's vote doesn't matter, and that you can't tell them to vote for Trump? Meanwhile, Trump's policy is deportation, building a wall, and militarization of the border. How can you say that? How can you say to a bunch of American immigrants from that came from south of the border, how can you say to them that you don't have a moral obligation to vote for Biden when their lives as they know it rely on who's president? How can you tell your disabled audience that their vote doesn't matter when Donald Trump plans to shatter all forms of social safety nets that have allowed people with disabilities to have even a semblance of support from the government? How can you say that in front of your audience that have disabilities and require support from the government? Elderly, veterans, they'll all be attacked by Trump. They'll all lose their benefits. Trans people, gay people, people of color, immigrants. Donald Trump's running on a day one shutdown of immigration and travel from the majority of Muslim nations in the Middle East and Africa. That is a day one policy. Full on, we're getting the Muslim ban back, and it's going to be permanent. The Muslim travel ban is coming back permanently, day one. That is one of Trump's campaign promises. You do not get to say that for some reason, under these circumstances, college students and American Palestinians, and mind you, there's a big difference between Palestinian refugees and people who are in America who have like some level of Palestinian ancestry, who have, because of this conflict, like embraced it and are now saying, how can you tell me, a Palestinian, to vote for Biden? There's a lot of people like that. You can't deny there's got to be a lot of people like that who have like 5% Palestinian, whose like parents are like great-great-grandparents came from Palestine before this current conflict, who are like acting as though they're like refugees of the conflict or something. There are lots of refugees of the conflict, don't get me wrong, and I even think, well, they can't vote for Biden. Mind you, remember guys, you have to be a citizen of the US to vote. Refugees are not citizens. So, presumably, especially when you consider how fucked the process is for refugees to gain citizenship here, there are not a lot of Palestinians who can vote for the president who are actually affecting this conversation. Like, if there are actually tons of Palestinians marching the street arguing that they not to vote for Biden, like, are they citizens or are they refugees? Because if they're citizens, chances are they haven't been affected by this all that directly, in which case this feels very bandwagony. The whole, like, I'm not going to vote for Biden because Palestine and Israel, despite Trump, like, literally making its policy that he'll, like, glass Palestine, with, like, he'll support Israel and glassing Palestine. Well, like, I'm bewildered. I'm at a loss for words. It's so stupid. I don't know how to engage with people who are so... who claim to care about politics so much and to claim about marginalized groups so much, but only when it allows them to feel morally pure. Only when it allows them to feel morally pure. This is all just a big moral purity test from people who are arguing not to vote Biden. It really does feel that way.